Hello, everybody. This is Larry O'Brien. I'm Vice President of Research at ARC Advisory Group, and welcome to another edition of the ARC Digital Transformation Viewpoints podcast. And we're going to be talking about OT cybersecurity today. And I have with me a couple of people from Schneider Electric today. I have Zakarya Drias, who's the OT cybersecurity leader for Schneider Electric, and I have Nasir Mundh, who, and refresh my memory, Nasir, because I know you just got a new title at Schneider. So what's your new title at Schneider?
Hey, Larry. So my title now is Cybersecurity Services Business Leader for the Energy Management business.
Yeah. And we know that's a hugely active business right now. So, just as a brief introduction, I'd like it if you could just tell us a little bit about, what Schneider's doing in cybersecurity, a little bit about your overall cybersecurity business and what the two of you are doing within that business.
Zach, go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, Larry, thanks for having us. So basically, what we do inside Schneider is really helping our customers manage risk of their operations. So position ourselves as a trusted partner that helps them really navigating all these cyber risks and threats to their operations. And we walk the journey with them that starts usually from helping them understand their cybersecurity posture. So we assess their current situation, whether from a processes perspective, people, and their current systems. We run assessments from asset inventory to risk assessments. And then based on that, we build with our customers roadmaps and programs on what they need to do to implement cybersecurity as an intrinsic component to their overall operations. And this results into including cybersecurity into the governance of their OT environments, into the culture they have in their operations from a people perspective, and also implementing cybersecurity controls into their environment. So either they are protecting the critical assets and the crown jewels they have, but also monitoring all the threats and external attempts to attack their systems. And then we continue in the journey to really help our customers operate security, and we provide managed security services that are at the same time proactive and helping customers really keep up with their exposure and the threat landscape and the threat intelligence that are contextualized to their environment, but also continuously monitor and detect and respond to any threats that's basically attempting to enter their operations. And in order to add to that, we help them augment their capabilities in managing the overall cybersecurity infrastructure, and this builds an overall capability that helps our customers accelerate their cybersecurity journey while protecting the most important thing they have, which is really the operations and making sure it's up and running without any disruption from cyber threats.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I know we at ARC view cybersecurity incidents as a major source of unplanned downtime for the manufacturing industry right now. And I think people are finally starting to catch on that this is really having a big impact on reliability, uptime, availability, and so forth. Let's talk a little bit about digital transformation, and either of you feel free to jump in on this. We talk a lot about cyber resilience and the need to, improve your cybersecurity stance. But how do you guys view cybersecurity as an enabler for digital transformation? How can we look at it as something, that can actually help us and add value?
So, yeah, Larry, I'll take that one. Sometimes people get it backwards. Sometimes people get it like, you need to go do digital transformation and then have cybersecurity to protect that. I think cybersecurity is what makes digital transformation possible. Right? The basic premise of digital transformation is that you have digitized your assets. So you're using data that's produced by those digitized assets to give you that information. And then you're using that information to gain advantage, to make your operations better. So you're basically monetizing the data that's coming out of it. And once that data is monetized, it becomes precious and needs to be protected. So cybersecurity, before you even embark on that journey, you need some way to trust that all that data that's moving around is protected. It's not just free fall for everybody. So cybersecurity is that trust layer for digital transformation. It gives the organizations the confidence to embrace AI, to embrace cloud, to embrace automation and get their systems connected at scale. The companies that move fastest aren't the ones who say, let's worry about security after we've done the digital transformation. They are the ones that build it from scratch, that they take security into account even prior to embarking on that digital transformation journey. And hence, not only is cybersecurity an enabler, but it's essential for digital transformation.
Zakarya, do you have any comments or?
I think just a little bit to add into what Nasir has mentioned, we have actually done it a lot for our customers, and this is coming from the ground. The most successful cybersecurity engagements or digital transformation engagements, the digital transformation engagements we have with our customers, and we have a digital transformation practice all over the world, are the ones that actually take cybersecurity as an essential, as Nasir mentioned. It's not an afterthought topic. It's actually the thing to start with. And before you jump into building any systems, any processes, any data lakes, let's make sure it's secured through the design reviews, implementation of security controls, and then you move to harvesting what you have in your data, and that's our customers will be able to tell you that as well.
Yeah, and I agree. Cybersecurity should not be an afterthought. It should be baked in from the beginning as much as possible. You know, we've been talking about. I mean, part of digital transformation is cloud computing, right? Getting that data, into places where that data probably didn't need to be accessed before. All kinds of data, right? Available to all kinds of people. So this naturally has been kind of blurring the lines between IT and OT, right? And we've seen this over the past decade. A lot of cybersecurity organizations within manufacturing companies are changing. I'm wondering, from the perspective of Schneider, how do you see the cultural shift towards this IT-OT convergence? What does it really mean? I mean, this is a term we use a lot, but we don't really talk about what it really means. And I'm wondering how you guys see that.
Yeah. I mean, you got it right. It's a cultural shift, right? IT/OT. It means that you're moving away from the feeling of my system, your system, to to our business. It's looking at things holistically. Like you're not doing it separately. It's a shift from separate teams with different priorities, with different metrics for success, to a shared focus of resilience, productivity, risk management, all these new terms coming in, moving away from those short data protection, operational excellence. Now you're combining all of these things together. So the organizations that create that common language among all those disparating, IT/OT is a byproduct of that. The initial is the cultural shift, as you pointed out. So the businesses that create the common language of business outcomes, security, operational excellence in one conversation, that's where IT/OT convergence is real.
Thanks. Zakarya, anything?
Now, just maybe one point there. If you take it more from breaking the walls, actually, in a company between, as Nasir mentioned, between the factories and the corporate offices, and there is a convergence at different levels. The convergence at the technology level, which we knew is going to happen anyways, but there is the convergence from the operations, and I believe, and the processes. And I believe, as Nasir mentioned, the successful convergence is the one that's driven by the business outcome. So regardless of, who is in doing what in the organization and what teams they had before, if we're looking into, we want to secure or to make sure how we have a resilient operations, then it's a mission-driven team right now, and it doesn't matter whether you are an IT or OT. It's all oriented towards having one outcome, which is keeping the operations up and running and increasing the productivity. And that's the successful one. That's really driven by the mission, not necessarily by trying to do the translation of the operations to IT and IT to OT. And that's actually proven to be really complex to manage and will lead into a potential failure.
Yeah, we need to look at this from a couple of different ways, right? We have the convergence of IT, OT, like we mentioned, in terms of, cloud computing and other IT technologies that are rapidly making their way, and AI, obviously, we don't want to leave AI out. But, I remember when there was like a decade-long lag time between when the the automation or manufacturing industry would take up an IT-based technology, right? And that time frame is now compressed, I think, to about 6 months, right? The influx of new IT technologies into the world of manufacturing is happening faster than it's ever happened before. That can be kind of hard to manage, but we need to get some communication going between these different groups within cybersecurity. IT does a lot of stuff really well that OT may not do, and OT has a deep understanding of manufacturing processes and the need for uptime, and reliability and things like that the IT world doesn't always appreciate. Yeah, I think, this is kind of an ongoing challenge, but I think it's still a very relevant term, and it's something that we very much still see happening right now, not the least of which, sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to add, I think you had a very good point here when you were talking about that, how OT's priority and IT's priorities are different, all right? At least they were thought in that time as being compressed. But if you look at what the reality is today on the ground, even if you talk about, IT's focus used to be data breach. Hey, it should be protected. My data should be protected. But now even that data breach is linked so closely to the production because of the recipes, because of the secrets, because of how things are done in a certain way, that becomes relevant to operations. Similarly, on the other side, if you have an OT asset that goes down because of this interconnectivity, those backdoors that come through an OT environment or an OT equipment into the network can go all the way up to the corporate level or the IT level. So IT-OT convergence, where it has created this value, has also created a bigger risk surface for cyber attacks. So both of them, even if they try, cannot get away from each other. They have to be combined. It has to be one language, one business resilience. We cannot separate IT resilience and OT resilience. It is just one business resilience now.
I agree. And if you want a great example of how that plays out in real life, look what happens during an attack, right? I mean, if somebody's attacking you, they're not going to care if they can attack you at the IT level. That's still going to probably make your operations go down if you don't have the proper, procedures in place and so forth. Like we saw with Colonial Pipeline, for example, right? That was an IT level attack, but that resulted in a complete shutdown of the pipeline because they lost visibility into the billing system. So there's no such thing as IT versus OT when you're being attacked, right? You have to look at the organization holistically. I think one of the other reasons is, with all this cloud technology and so forth, and especially now that we have things like open process automation, right? So I want to kind of transition into this open process automation topic now, because this is using a lot of the same technologies that we've just been talking about, right? Containerization, cloud-based computing. It's basically creating software, defined automation that can exist, anywhere you want it to exist, right? Depending on how you want to approach this. So with the cloud, what's your opinion on how organizations should go about securing the cloud, especially in the context of this world of software-defined automation and OPA?
Well, look, the honest answer is when you look into the cloud, I think cloud has been there for some time now. We had SCADA systems running on the cloud. So it's from a technology perspective, it's being leveraged as a compute. So we are expanding the compute. But the difference that's coming with the software-defined automation, where and OPA was probably the serious attempt to really decouple software from hardware, and that initiated this let's say transition in the industry. Decoupling software from the hardware means that you're not caring about the hardware box. You're not securing the hardware, the physical box, but you want to secure the control workload. And that control workload is not, or software itself is not necessarily bound into a specific hardware. So it moves, whether it's on premise, on the edge, it's in the cloud. The security is not necessarily about the environment. And don't get me wrong, the environment itself has to have some security guardrails to make sure that, you protect from the obvious attacks. But now the security shifts to become really a property of the software itself. So we kind of moving from the outside in, well, let's put different, from a perimeter, and let's make sure we make it difficult for someone to get into this open system where Now you need to think from an inside out. So what's the most important thing that I have in my plant, and how is that translated into my software packages? And then my software packages need to make sure they have intrinsic security, whether it's signed code, attested execution, the identity, encrypted configuration, encrypted communication. And that's, we have, I believe, it's really in the opportunity for the overall industry to make a big shift in terms of cybersecurity, because all what we have been talking about right now that could be intrinsically into the software was not possible with a lot of the legacy devices before and the legacy protocols. So personally looking at it, it's really an opportunity for us to bring in an opportunity for us to make security better by design, by default, into the operations. And then, of course, you will see a lot of topics around zero trust and microsegmentation. And these are all topics that were proven in IT and they've been maybe running for a couple of years now, that they are now part of the this software-defined automation, or let's say this new OT environment that are relying on open or open process, what was driven by open process automation, but translated into software-defined automation. And that's actually now possible. So if you want to do a microsegmentation in a 30 years old plant, it's really, really difficult. And to make it happen and then also implement zero trust principles, and you can see the CISA article about zero trust. It's really quite not impossible, but it's really difficult or impossible to imagine that we just take the concept that we have in IT and deploy it in OT. What we are doing with software-defined automation is we are basically accelerating that journey that will make it possible. Now, my honest opinion here and input is someone would tell you that we can run the SDAs and the software-defined automation the same way we are running other workloads and environments and software that we are doing in the cloud today is probably still dreaming. There's still a lot of work ahead of us as an industry to make sure that we bring that level of security and that technicity that we have in the IT or in the cloud environments down into this software-defined, whether they run on the edge or on the cloud. But its context, the operational context, that they needs to be also baked into all this orchestration of security and management of security in these environments. So I think it's...
Can you elaborate on that a little bit by what you mean about operational context?
So let's say that you are assigning identities to your new control workloads, right? And then you have an orchestrator that manages the deployment of these different containers into different environments. And then you see that there is an ongoing, then you are monitoring, and then you see that there is an ongoing security, or at least attempt. And then you want to, your immediate, let's say, IT-driven mindset, your immediate action would be, all right, put a rule, shut down this work package. So you cannot shut down the work package itself. You have to move it probably from that environment to a safer environment of execution. And that's actually needs to take into account what are you managing actually? Do you have a safety critical system? Is that change going to result into any disruptions of the safety system that you have? Or are you going to reduce or delay some of the operations because that move from one area to the other, even if it's safer, it's going to create a delay in your overall process, and that will result into a disruption in the operation. So these need to be taken into account when threat models are being done. So threat models are not only about security, but what happens also from an operations perspective. And that's the context that needs to be built in to the security system that is, taking advantage of what's inside the software, but it needs to have something on the top that orchestrates all the security in a contextualized manner.
Yeah, and I think those complex relationships also speak to the issue of safety, right? I mean, it could have an impact on plant safety, which I know you guys have a lot of expertise in at Schneider Electric. I'd like to shift gears again slightly, because this is another related topic, right? So we were talking about understanding complex relationships and how certain changes can have effects in certain aspects of the system that people might not see immediately, right? And I think one of the things that people are looking to right now to help them make those, distinguish from certain things that might be hazardous or these complex relationships within plants and all this data is AI, right? And we're looking at AI, in the context of cybersecurity now. I mean, I'm doing some research on the industrial firewall business, for example. They're using AI to help, configure firewall rules and all types of things. We're using machine learning and deep learning to look at patterns of data, to look for threats. I'm wondering what your opinion is, from Schneider Electric about where AI is needed in cybersecurity and how it can augment cybersecurity. And maybe the most important issue that I've been talking about with people lately is the need to keep humans in the loop. So what are your thoughts on that?
So I'll get back. So the scale and speed of threats are fast outgrowing human capacity. Okay, they're already doing that, and in the future, it seems to be going in the same trend, right? AI can analyze, a large amount of data and get down, identify patterns, surface risks, check those things out, and come to a certain level and find a needle in a haystack much faster than humans are capable of doing, right? However, ultimately, cybersecurity is about managing risk. So there is some judgment. There is some security decisions need to be taken that often, involve business trade-offs, ethics, judgments, things that AI alone cannot fully understand. So yes, humans need to be in the loop. The most effective model would be AI accelerated and human led, where AI augments the human expertise that's there with data, not replace it. So AI is going to augment humans, not just replace them, because that judgment part is still going to be missing, at least for a while.
Yeah, I agree. And we talk a lot about AI as kind of an enabler for autonomous operations, which I also see happening out there, but still need a human in the loop, right? I mean, these are very volatile processes. There's a lot of risk involved. And I do like the way that you're characterizing cybersecurity as based on risk, right? And that's what most of my clients, my end user clients in the process industries that I talk to, everybody's shifting to a risk-based approach to cybersecurity. I think AI in a lot of ways will enable us to do that better, because we'll be able to identify risks more effectively. We'll be able to identify some of these, complex relationships that we can't immediately identify just by looking at data. And there is a lot of data, not just from cybersecurity, but from the process as well, that can give you some insight into where things might be going with the process and so forth. So yeah, I think, there's definitely a place for AI, but we cannot ignore the human in the loop. Zakarya, did you want to make any comment?
I think just think to add to your point, to Nasir's point, on the concrete example that we have seen is, if you look into, for example, the detection and response to threats, or let's say responding to risk situation, the trade-offs. We went from people not noticing incidents to, all right, now we know about them, but to respond to them it takes a long time. And then an average breach now gets, maybe with AI, it's going to go a little bit faster to a couple of minutes. So the time to do the investigation and respond, by then it's going to get through. So what AI is bringing to the table as well is that speed of response, but by taking a larger amount of constraints and larger amount of data, not only around security, but also around the operations. So what I see that's enabling us is really, and again, I'm going to throw the context word there, is instead of saying, all right, I detected an attack on IP address, XYZ, so I have an attack on, or an attempt to access this workstation, the engineering workstation that is managing, or that's programming this controller that is managing this boiler. And therefore, the recommendation is, let's move the boiler to a manual control while you fix the workstation itself. And that before, if you want to do it at a speed, you can do it, and we can do it now. but it's taken a long time because we have to take a lot of signals from different and knowledge about the environment itself. And every environment is different, or at least that's what every asset owner, they believe that their environments are different from other asset owners. So that speed is now, or contextualized response at speed is now possible with AI. Now, the other thing about the AI is that it becomes part of the autonomous operations, which makes the discussion a little bit different because now it becomes of the stack that you use, right? At least to move towards autonomous operation, which now brings AI as a stack to the overall asset that you need to manage, or the risk you need to manage around AI itself and the data and the models, which requires an additional risk register for our customers and for the asset owners to monitor and to manage.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Customers need to do an asset inventory for AI tools now, right? You need to understand what kind of tools you're using in your own organization, even in the software development organization, for example, but also in operations. I can't think of a software package that's coming out right now that doesn't have some kind of AI augmented functionality in it, right? So we need to keep track of that, and we need to have sufficient guardrails for AI technology. So it's an additional risk, that must be managed in many ways. So you mentioned something earlier. You mentioned it a couple of times in the podcast here, and that is the legacy installed base. And this is kind of a challenge here in the process industries. I know it's been a huge challenge in the heavy process industries. I mean, at ARC, we've been tracking the issue of, control system migration and modernization, and, what are the economic benefits for doing this and so forth. But I'm wondering how Schneider Electric deals with a legacy installed base, and how do we balance this transition to all these new technologies like digital transformation and software-defined automation with this enormous, legacy installed base. Many products which are 30, 40 years old. I mean, I've seen stuff out there it probably belongs in a museum somewhere, but it's still out there. So how do you guys deal with that?
That's a very good question, and Larry. And actually, it's I think what keeps our customers also up at night. And the reality is probably the economy right now runs on that legacy installed base, whether it's utilities or manufacturing or chemicals. And everyone is working, whether it's driven by digital transformation or it's modernization, or regardless of what's the driver, everyone is looking into how do we modernize the environment, the operational environments, for better operational excellence, for better throughput, But the reality is nobody is ripping out a 20 years old control system on the Friday and running software-defined automation on the Monday. So it's a journey and it's a strategy. There will be always coexistence of installed base and new systems together. And then both systems have to coexist not only from an operational perspective, where they have to operate the plant, but they also have to coexist from all the required properties. If we consider cybersecurity as being one, safety being another one, and we look into cybersecurity, as we mentioned earlier, it's a risk-based approach. So with the new systems, we have a better capability, and software-defined systems, we have a better capability to have intrinsic security to the system. That has to be done, as we said. We have to take advantage of that. Asset owners need to take advantage of that. So they make sure that everything is built into the new systems. But for the legacy systems, we have to really make sure that we are managing risk through compensating controls, perimeter security. And what's more important is the gateway between the new systems and the old systems. And that's basically where you have the risk could be transitioning from one environment to the other. And let's say more from the legacy environments to the new systems. And that's the piece that really needs to have that's where we implement, or we should implement, or the industry needs to move towards implementing zero trust mechanisms there, translation of security. There are technical ways to do it, but more from a procedural and operational perspective, that's the junction that needs to be monitored quite frequently, or let it not continuously, to make sure that there is nothing going between the old system or the legacy environment to the new environment. At the end of the day, well, what we want to manage is the overall risk. And while one could be compensating for the other, the reality is there is a lot of intrinsic risk into the legacy systems that needs to be taken care of and not forgotten just because the products themselves don't have the capability. And Nasir, maybe you want to add?
Yes. So we have another concept within Schneider of lifecycle management for our customers, right? So when you look at the assets that are old, and Zach mentioned some of so you take digital transformation or you take cybersecurity controls to a level that it's possible, beyond which, you don't have that connectivity. The risk surface is lower also, but you don't have that connectivity. So once you get to that point, how do you get beyond that? That's where we put either the compensating controls, we put the perimeter controls, we put some sensing equipments in there to be able to get as much information out of it. You could put some level of sensors that measure let's say that measures the vibration there in those equipments or anything else like that from an operational perspective, and try to extract as much data as possible until you get to a point where that end of life equipment that's possibly end of life or deserve to be in a museum kind of equipment that's going to be replaced. But until that point, you're going to take that digital transformation along with, or rather cybersecurity along with digital transformation up to the point where it's possible. And then beyond that, monitor the compensatory controls, to put sensors in there to get as much information out of that legacy. But that all kind of fits into the framework of lifecycle management for our customers' assets as a service.
Yeah, and I think that's one good thing that you guys bring to the table, right, is you have this understanding of life cycle management and how to deal with all this. And it's one of the things that really, going back to that IT-OT convergence issue, right, this isn't something that IT normally has to deal with, right? They don't normally have to deal with 35-year-old PCs, running on whatever version of Windows or whatever that's still out there. So it is kind of unique, I think, to the manufacturing and critical infrastructure sector. And anybody that you're dealing with is going to have to understand that if you want to have an effective solution. So we've talked about AI. We've talked about the legacy installed base. We've talked about open process automation. I think the only other major topic we have to discuss here, it's kind of related to all of these, is regulatory compliance. And this is a topic that we've seen a lot here at ARC in the past year and a half, especially because of the new European Union cybersecurity regulations, as I'm sure you've all heard of, good old NIS2. And CRA. So what is Schneider picking up from the customer base as far as regulatory compliance? Are people struggling with this? Are people even investing in this now, or what's the landscape around regulatory compliance?
That's an ocean to boil right now.
Yeah, it's an ocean to boil.
That's a huge topic that we could have multiple podcasts on.
Maybe we can get in the next podcast. We can get to that one in a little more detail.
I love more. I mean, we can have multiple. I mean, NIS2 by itself is a podcast. Literally, the amount of elements that are with there. And not only that, but the complexity of the countries able to use whatever from there and adopt it to their own requirements. That in itself is an exercise with the time lag and everything. So right now, to give any succinct answer on regulatory compliance, everybody has to. Some have to do it by legal mandate, some have to do it by industry practices, but everybody has to somehow do that. Everybody is investing, some by force, like I said, some by law they have to do it, otherwise there are legal implications of it, and some have to do it because there are industry practices, and in case of something wrong going on, that's what they will be measured again. So it's there. In order to get into each one of them would take some level of time of how are people looking at NIS2 and investing against that. What's happening to NERC-CEP? It's still there. How do people come around it? What's the evolution of NERC-CEP? What are the regulations that are there? What are the regulations that would come? What is the Critical Infrastructure Act? It's just an endless topic that is very, you can't kind of compress it into a one small answer. But in short, if we have to, yes, it's real. Regulatory compliance is real. Yes, people are aware of it. And yes, they are trying to make investments into those. Would be how I look at it.
Yeah, we could definitely get into more detail about that in the next podcast, because we will be having another podcast with Schneider Electric on the topic of cybersecurity. I think that's probably all the time we have for today. I really want to thank you guys for talking about these issues with me. You know, there is a lot happening in industrial cybersecurity right now, and will continue to happen throughout the next year. So again, my name's Larry O'Brien. This has been another installment of the ARC Digital Transformation Viewpoints podcast. Once again, I've been talking to Zach Drias and Nasir Mundh of Schneider Electric about industrial and OT cybersecurity. And we look forward to seeing you guys in the next podcast. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Larry.
Thank you, Larry.